Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
The restaurant I work at is located in a busy shopping plaza, right next to a Target. During my breaks, I usually walk over there to grab a drink or a snack, still wearing my work clothes because who has time to change for a 15-minute break? I've done this routine hundreds of times without any issues. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other. I had just finished the lunch rush and told my manager I was taking my break. The restaurant was finally quiet after being slammed with customers, and I desperately needed a cold drink and maybe some chips to get me through the rest of my shift. I walked into Target, grabbed a cart, and headed straight for the grocery section. I was minding my own business, trying to decide between regular Coke and Diet Coke when this woman appeared out of nowhere. The woman demanded that I help her find organic pasta sauce. I looked around, confused, thinking maybe she was talking to someone else. But nope, she was staring right at me with this expectant look on her face. I politely told her that I didn't work there and was just shopping. She accused me of lying and said I was wearing a uniform. I explained that this was my restaurant uniform and that I worked next door, not at Target. The woman said she didn't care where else I worked and insisted that I also worked at Target. She demanded help immediately. She was getting louder, and other customers were starting to stare. I felt my face getting hot with embarrassment. I've dealt with difficult customers at the restaurant before, but this was different. This woman was completely unreasonable. I told her again that I really didn't work there and didn't know where anything was in the store. She started screaming about how I was making excuses and reminded me that the customer is always right. She was practically yelling now, waving her arms around like she was conducting an orchestra of crazy. A few Target employees were watching from a distance, but none of them seemed eager to get involved. I apologized, but said I couldn't help her because I was on my break from my actual job. She went ballistic, screaming about how I don't get breaks when customers need help and calling the whole situation unacceptable. Then she demanded to see my manager right away. That's when something inside me just snapped. Maybe it was the stress from the lunch rush. Maybe it was dealing with entitled customers all day at my real job, or maybe I was just tired of being pushed around by someone who wouldn't listen to reason. I shouted back at her, demanding to see her manager instead. I used the same tone she had been using on me, loud and demanding and completely over the top. The woman's mouth dropped open like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stammered and asked what I meant. I repeated myself, telling her that she heard me correctly and that I wanted her manager immediately. I said I wouldn't be treated like this by someone like her and kept demanding her manager. I was channeling every difficult customer I had ever encountered, using their own entitled energy against her. It felt incredible. She stuttered that she didn't work there. I told her that didn't matter and kept shouting for her to get her manager. I barked the word go at her 3 times, taking a step forward with each shout and pointing my finger at her the same way she had been doing to me. Her eyes went wide with what looked like genuine fear. She protested that she was just a customer. I shouted back that I didn't care, that she had been rude to me, and that I wanted to speak to someone in charge of her. I demanded to know where her supervisor or boss was and said that somebody needed to hear about her behavior. The woman started backing away from me, stumbling over her own feet. She looked around frantically like she was hoping someone would come to her rescue, but everyone was just watching the show. I asked her if she was going to get her manager or not, telling her that I was waiting and had all day. That's when she completely cracked. She turned around and actually ran away, pushing her cart so fast it was practically flying down the aisle. I watched her disappear around the corner toward the exit, probably going to find the first Target employee she could complain to about the crazy person in the store. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard and trying to process what had just happened. A few customers nearby started clapping, and one older gentleman gave me a thumbs up. He told me that what I did was beautiful and absolutely perfect. I bought my drink and chips and walked back to the restaurant, still a little stunned by my own behavior. When I told my co-workers what happened, they thought it was hilarious. My manager just shook his head and said I should probably avoid Target for a while. The funny thing is, about a week later, I was walking past the Target customer service desk and overheard one of the employees talking to another customer. The employee was explaining how they had a lady come in the previous week claiming one of their employees was harassing her in the soda aisle. But when they checked the cameras, it was just some girl in a restaurant uniform who didn't even work there. The lady had been yelling at her first. Management told her they couldn't help her with complaints about non-employees. I never saw that woman again. I live in a small house, but it's mine and I worked really hard to afford it. The best part is the driveway. It's just wide enough for 2 cars, which is perfect since my partner and I both drive. When my parents visit on weekends, there's always space for them too. It might not sound like much, but in this neighborhood where street parking is a nightmare, having your own driveway is like winning the lottery. My partner works early shifts at the hospital, so they're usually gone by 6 in the morning. I work from home most days, which means I'm usually the only one using the driveway during the day. That's probably why I noticed her right away. It was a Tuesday morning when I first saw the silver sedan parked in my driveway. I was making coffee in the kitchen when I looked out the window and did a double take. There was definitely a car there that wasn't mine or my partner's. A woman was sitting in the driver's seat, completely absorbed in her phone. I figured maybe she was lost or waiting for someone in the neighborhood. These things happen, right? I kept an eye on her while I worked at my computer near the window. After about 20 minutes, she finally looked up and caught me watching her. Instead of looking embarrassed or apologetic like most people would, she gave me the dirtiest look I've ever received. It was like I was the one doing something wrong. Then she made this dismissive hand gesture, like she was shooing me away, and mouthed that she was leaving. But she didn't leave. She sat there for another 5 minutes, still on her phone before finally backing out and driving away. I shrugged it off and got back to work. The next morning I woke up and immediately looked out the window. Sure enough, the same silver car was back in my driveway. This time though, the woman was nowhere to be seen. The car was just sitting there, taking up half my parking space. I waited a couple hours, thinking maybe she'd come back soon and move it. When she didn't, I decided to leave a polite note on her windshield. I wrote something asking her not to park there since it was my private driveway. I figured maybe she genuinely didn't realize it was private property. I spent the rest of the morning checking the window every few minutes like some kind of paranoid neighbor. Around lunchtime, I saw her walking back to her car. She had this weird grin on her face as she read my note, which immediately made my stomach drop. I decided to go outside and talk to her directly. Maybe we could sort this out like reasonable adults. I greeted her and asked if she worked around the area. I explained that this was actually my driveway and she couldn't park there. Her response shocked me completely. She told me she knew it was my driveway and that she was using it anyway. Just like that, no shame at all. I told her she couldn't park there because I needed the space and it was my property. She explained that she worked around the corner and there was no parking anywhere else, so she parked in my driveway instead. I looked around and pointed out several empty parking spots I could see from where we were standing. There were literally 4 or 5 open spaces within a block of my house. She simply said she wasn't going to park there. When I asked her why not, she told me it was because she didn't want to. The audacity was unreal. I tried to stay calm and explain that I understood parking could be frustrating, but this was my driveway, and she couldn't just use someone else's property because it was convenient for her. She responded by telling me she was going to keep parking there no matter what I said. Then she did something that made my blood boil. She ripped up my note right in front of me and threw the pieces into the storm drain. After that, she walked over to the dropped curb at the edge of my driveway and just sat down on it, staring at me with this smug expression. We had this bizarre staring contest for about 10 minutes. She was clearly trying to intimidate me or make me uncomfortable enough to give up. Finally, she got in her car and drove away, but not before rolling down her window and telling me she'd see me tomorrow. That night, I talked it over with my partner. They were as outraged as I was, but we weren't sure what our options were. Calling the police seemed extreme, but this woman was clearly planning to keep using our driveway like her personal parking spot. The next morning, I woke up early and moved my car so it was parked diagonally across the entire driveway. There was no way she could fit her car in there now. I felt pretty proud of my solution. Around 9 o'clock, I heard a car door slam outside. I looked out to see Karen standing next to her car, which was parked on the street, hands on her hips, glaring at my house. She walked up to my front door and started pounding on it loudly. I could hear her yelling that she knew I was inside and demanding that I move my car immediately. I opened the door and greeted her calmly, asking if I could help her with something. She angrily told me to move my car because she needed to park. I explained that this was my driveway and I could park however I wanted on my own property. She called me ridiculous and reminded me that she had told me she worked around the corner. I reminded her that I had also told her there were plenty of street parking spots available. She was getting redder in the face by the minute. She complained that she had important meetings and couldn't be walking blocks to get to work. I suggested that maybe she should have thought about that before she decided to steal someone else's parking space. She threatened to call the police on me. I told her that was a great idea and that I was sure they'd love to hear about how she was trespassing on private property and harassing the homeowner. That seemed to deflate her a bit. She stormed back to her car, but instead of leaving, she just sat there for the next hour, occasionally honking her horn and shooting dirty looks at my house. Around 10:30, a police car pulled up. Karen immediately got out and started talking animatedly to the officer, pointing at my house and my car. The officer nodded politely, then walked up to my door. The officer explained that he was responding to a complaint about a parking dispute. I confirmed that there was indeed a dispute and explained that this woman had been parking in my driveway without permission for 3 days. When I had asked her to stop, she told me she was going to keep doing it anyway. The officer asked if this was my property, and I confirmed it was, offering to show documentation if needed. The officer talked to Karen for a few more minutes. I couldn't hear everything, but I could see her getting more and more agitated. Finally, the officer came back to me and explained that she was claiming I had given her permission to park there and then changed my mind. I told him that was completely false and that I had never seen this woman before 3 days ago. When he asked if I had any evidence of our interactions, I suddenly remembered that my doorbell camera had been recording everything. I pulled out the footage on my phone and showed the officer our conversation from the day before, including the part where she admitted she knew it was my driveway and was using it anyway. The officer watched the whole thing, then walked back to Karen. This time their conversation was much shorter and much less friendly. Karen got in her car and drove away without even looking back. The officer assured me that she wouldn't be bothering me anymore and told me to call if she came back. I thanked him and went back inside feeling victorious. But the best part came later that afternoon. I was working when I heard another car pull up. I looked out, half expecting to see Karen back for round 2, but instead I saw a tow truck. The driver got out and walked up to my door. The driver asked if I was the homeowner who had called about unauthorized parking. I told him I hadn't called a tow truck. He seemed confused and explained that someone had called and reported a silver sedan that had been illegally parking in this driveway. They wanted it towed if it showed up again. Just then, Karen's car turned the corner. She saw the tow truck and immediately pulled over, but it was too late. The driver had already spotted her and pointed out that her car was the one he was looking for. Karen jumped out and started running toward us, but the tow truck driver was already hooking up her car. She frantically told him he couldn't tow her car because she was just parking. The driver explained that this was private property and the owner had requested that unauthorized vehicles be towed. She protested that she parked there every day. The driver told her that made it worse, not better. She turned to me, desperate now, and begged me to tell him it was okay. She even offered to pay me money to park there. I told her she should have thought of that before she decided to be so rude about it. I went back inside and watched from the window as her car got loaded onto the tow truck. Karen was on her phone, probably calling someone to pick her up, looking absolutely miserable. I never found out who called the tow truck, but I have a feeling it might have been the police officer. Either way, Karen never came back. My driveway has been peacefully mine ever since. I've been working at Bella's Italian Bistro for a couple of years now. It's a nice, family-owned restaurant in the upscale part of town, and I genuinely love my job. The owners treat us well, the customers are usually decent, and the tips are good enough that I can afford my own apartment while going to college part-time. I work mostly evening shifts since my classes are during the day, and weekends are when we make the real money. That Saturday started like any other weekend shift. I clocked in at 4 p.m., tied my apron, and checked which section I'd be working. My manager pulled me aside right away and told me we had a private party that day. The whole restaurant was reserved from 6 to 10 p.m. for someone's birthday. It was going to be about 40 people, so we needed everyone on their best behavior tonight. I nodded and got ready. Private parties usually meant bigger tips if you played your cards right, so I was looking forward to it. The woman who made the reservation had apparently dropped serious money to have the entire place to herself for 4 hours. That kind of thing doesn't happen often at our restaurant. Around 5:30, the birthday party started arriving. The woman celebrating looked to be in her 50s, dripping in jewelry and fancy clothes. Her guests were dressed similarly, the kind of people who probably spent more on their outfits than I made in a month. But hey, I don't judge. Rich people can be perfectly nice customers. The birthday woman, let's call her Karen because that's exactly what she turned out to be, immediately started acting like she owned the place. She was snapping her fingers at us, rearranging tables without asking, and talking to the staff like we were her personal servants rather than restaurant employees. She pointed at me and demanded that I move a table 3 inches to the left. Then she ordered me to dim the lights more because this was her special day and everything needed to be perfect. I bit my tongue and helped move the table. It was going to be a long night, but I've dealt with demanding customers before. Usually they settle down once the food comes out and they start enjoying themselves. But Karen didn't settle down. If anything, she got worse as the evening went on. She complained that her appetizer was too cold, then complained that her soup was too hot. She sent back her salad because the dressing was on the side instead of mixed in, even though that's exactly how she ordered it. Every time I walked past her table, she had some new demand. The real trouble started around 8 p.m. I was clearing plates from another table when Karen suddenly appeared beside me and demanded that I go to her car and get her purse from the back seat. I apologized and explained that I couldn't leave the restaurant during my shift. I offered to ask my manager if someone could help her or suggested that maybe one of her guests could retrieve it for her. Karen's face turned red immediately. You could see she wasn't used to being told no. She asked me if I knew who she was and reminded me that she had reserved the entire restaurant. She claimed that made me her employee for the evening, and when she told me to do something, I had to do it. I felt my stomach drop. I've had difficult customers before, but this was crossing a line I'd never encountered. I explained that while I understood she had rented out the restaurant for her party, that didn't change the fact that I worked for the restaurant, not for her personally. I told her I wasn't allowed to leave the premises during my shift, and I certainly couldn't go through her personal vehicle. The dining room had gotten noticeably quieter. Her 40 guests were starting to stare at our conversation. Karen looked around and seemed to realize she had an audience, which only made her angrier. She started yelling about how I was embarrassing her in front of her friends. She reminded me that she had paid good money for this evening, and part of what she paid for was service. Real service, she said, not attitude from some college brat who thought she was too good to walk to a parking lot. I stayed calm and told her I was happy to provide excellent service inside the restaurant. I could get her anything from our menu, refill her drinks, accommodate dietary restrictions, whatever she needed. But I made it clear that I could not and would not leave the building to go through her car. That's when she completely lost it. Karen grabbed her full glass of red wine and threw it directly in my face. The cold liquid hit me like a slap, soaking my hair, running down my face and staining my white shirt completely. I stood there dripping, stunned and humiliated, in front of 40 strangers. The entire room went dead silent. Even her guests looked shocked. A few people gasped, and I heard someone mutter about how inappropriate that was. But I wasn't just some pushover college kid. My dad had taught me to stand up for myself, and I knew my rights as an employee. More importantly, I knew what had just happened was assault, no matter how rich she was. I announced that what she had done was assault, and I was calling the police. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, wine still dripping from my hair. Karen's eyes went wide. Apparently, she hadn't thought there would be consequences for her actions. She tried to downplay it, saying it was just a little wine and that I shouldn't be so dramatic. I told her that she had thrown a drink in my face because I wouldn't go through her car. That was assault, and she had done it in front of 40 witnesses. I dialed 911 while walking toward the back of the restaurant. My manager appeared immediately. He'd seen the whole thing happen. He asked if I was okay and what I needed. I told him I needed to file a police report because she had assaulted me for refusing to leave work to get something from her car. My manager nodded grimly and went to handle the situation with Karen while I talked to the dispatcher. The police said they'd send someone right over. When I came back to the dining room, Karen was in full meltdown mode. She was yelling at my manager about how she'd have us all fired, how she'd leave bad reviews everywhere, how she knew the mayor personally. Her guests looked mortified. Several of them were quietly asking for their coats. She screamed that this was ridiculous and that I was ruining her birthday party. She demanded that I be fired immediately. My manager told her that she had assaulted his employee. The police were on their way, and she needed to calm down or he'd have to ask her entire party to leave. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. Two officers walked in and I could see Karen's demeanor change immediately. She suddenly got very sweet and innocent. The first officer said they had gotten a call about an assault and asked what happened. I explained what happened while Karen tried to interrupt with her version of events. But here's the thing about having 40 witnesses. Most of them aren't going to lie for you when you've just humiliated yourself in public. The officer asked Karen directly if she had thrown a drink at me. She admitted she had, but tried to minimize it, saying it was barely anything. She claimed I was being disrespectful and ruining her special day. She reminded them that she had paid a lot of money to rent this place. The second officer told her that didn't give her the right to assault someone. Based on what they had heard from multiple witnesses, they were going to need her to come with them. That's when Karen really lost it. She started screaming about how this was unfair, how she was being persecuted, how she'd sue everyone involved. But the officers had heard enough. They put her in handcuffs right there in front of all her guests. She shrieked that this was insane and that they couldn't arrest her. She asked if they knew how much money she had and threatened to have their jobs. The first officer told her she could discuss that with the judge. Right now, she was under arrest for assault. They walked her out in handcuffs while her party guests watched in complete silence. A few of them approached me afterward to apologize for her behavior and make sure I was okay. Apparently, several of them barely knew her. She was someone's boss who had invited half the office. My manager comped everyone's meals except Karen's and told them they were welcome back anytime. Most of her guests ended up staying and having a much better time without her there. A few of them even left me extra tips in their business cards, saying they'd be back specifically to request my section. Karen spent the night in jail and ended up with a criminal record over a glass of wine and her inability to accept the word no. Her fancy birthday party became the story her co-workers would tell for years about the time their boss got arrested for throwing wine at a waitress. About a year and a half ago, I couldn't afford to live alone, and that's when I found her posting on a roommate finder website. She seemed normal enough, clean, responsible, and looking for someone to split a decent 2-bedroom apartment 50-50. The place was perfect, good location, reasonable rent when split between two people, and we both signed the lease together as equal tenants. I moved in with my few belongings, mostly just my bedroom furniture and some kitchen basics. She already had most of the living room furniture, which worked out fine since I couldn't afford much anyway. We got along well at first, keeping to ourselves mostly but being friendly when we crossed paths. Everything was going smoothly until about 6 months ago when she started dating this new guy. At first, he was just over occasionally for dinner or weekend stays. Then it became more frequent. Soon he was practically living there, using our shower, eating our food, and taking up space on the couch every night. I didn't say much because technically He wasn't on the lease and I figured it was temporary. Around the same time, she got really into gardening. She spent weekends working in our small backyard, planting flowers and vegetables. I'll admit it looked nice, and I appreciated that she was taking care of the outdoor space. I'm not much of a gardener myself, so I was happy to let her handle the yard work while I focused on keeping the inside clean. But last week, everything changed. She asked me to sit down at our kitchen table for what she called an important conversation. I figured maybe she wanted to talk about splitting utilities differently or setting some boundaries about her boyfriend's constant presence. She told me that we needed to talk about the living situation. When I asked what was up, she explained that her boyfriend and I had decided they wanted to take the next step in their relationship and move in together officially. I thought that was great for them and asked if they were thinking about finding a new place together. She said they actually wanted to stay in our current apartment, but they wanted to live alone, just the two of them. It took me a moment to process what she was saying. When I asked if she was asking me to move out, she confirmed that yes, she thought that would be best for everyone and that I needed to start looking for a new place. I pointed out that we both signed the lease together and were equal tenants. I asked why I should be the one to move out if she wanted to change the living situation. She argued that she should get to stay because she had made this place her home. She brought up all the work she had put into the garden outside, mentioning how she had spent hundreds of dollars on plants and soil and did all the yard work to keep the place looking nice. I told her I appreciated the garden, but that it didn't give her more rights to the apartment than me. She then mentioned that most of the furniture was hers too, the couch, dining table, and coffee table. She said I would just be taking my bedroom stuff anyway. I explained that the furniture situation didn't change the fact that we were both on the lease equally. I told her honestly that I didn't want to move, that I liked it there, and that I shouldn't have to uproot my entire life just because she wanted to play house with her boyfriend. She crossed her arms and gave me a look like I was being completely unreasonable. She insisted that this was ridiculous and that she had clearly invested more in the place than I had. She claimed the garden alone should prove that she cared more about maintaining the apartment. I offered a compromise. I told her I had been thinking about it and was willing to let her boyfriend move in since she already had the master bedroom and they would have plenty of space. I suggested we could adjust the rent split to account for 3 people instead of 2. She rejected this idea completely, saying they wanted privacy and wanted to live as a couple without having to deal with a roommate. I told her that if that's what they wanted, they should find their own place together because I wasn't moving out just because she had decided she wanted something different. The conversation went in circles for another 20 minutes. She kept bringing up the garden and the furniture like they somehow made her more entitled to stay than me. She even had the nerve to suggest that since I was single, it would be easier for me to just move somewhere else. I told her that my relationship status had nothing to do with my right to live in an apartment I was legally entitled to. I reminded her that we both signed the lease and both paid rent, so neither of us had more claim to the place than the other. She insisted that she had made improvements and that the garden was going to increase the property value. I pointed out that she had planted some flowers and tomatoes, which wasn't exactly a major renovation, and that she had done it because she wanted to, not because I had asked her to. The more we talked, the more entitled she became. She started raising her voice and acting like I was being selfish for not just giving in to what she wanted. Finally, she said that if I was going to be difficult about it, she would just have her boyfriend move in anyway, and that I couldn't stop them. I told her that actually I could stop them. I explained that he wasn't on the lease, and I hadn't agreed to let him become a permanent resident there. I warned her that if she tried to move him in without my consent, I would talk to the landlord about lease violations. That's when she really lost it. She yelled that I was being such a difficult person, and that all she was asking was for me to be reasonable and find somewhere else to live. She kept going on about how much work she had put into the place. I reminded her that I had put 1.5 years of rent payments into the place and told her I wasn't going anywhere. The argument ended with her storming off to her room and slamming the door. For the past week, she's been giving me the silent treatment and passive-aggressively leaving gardening magazines around the apartment. I guess to remind me of her precious garden. Yesterday, I got home from work to find her and her boyfriend sitting at the kitchen table with what looked like apartment listings spread out in front of them. She told me they were looking at places for me to move to and that there were some really nice studios within my budget. I reminded her that I had already told her I wasn't moving and that if they wanted to live together without a roommate, they needed to find their own place. Her boyfriend chimed in saying that this didn't have to be complicated because she had been there longer and had more invested in the apartment. I corrected him, explaining that we had actually moved in at the same time and that being invested didn't mean anything legally since we were both on the lease equally. She then claimed that the landlord liked her better anyway because she always handled communications with him about maintenance issues. I told her that was only because she was home more often than I was, and that it didn't make her the primary tenant. At this point, I was getting really tired of the whole situation, so I decided to call their bluff. I told them that if they were so confident about their position, we should call the landlord right then and ask him what he thought about the situation. I pulled out my phone and started looking up our landlord's number. Suddenly, they both got very quiet. I called the landlord and explained the situation. I told him we were both on the lease equally on a month-to-month basis, that she wanted me to move out so her boyfriend could move in, that I didn't want to move out, and asked for his input on the situation. After I hung up the phone, I looked at both of them and shared what the landlord had said. He had told me that since we were both equal tenants on a month-to-month lease, neither of us could force the other to leave. He also mentioned that adding an additional resident would require his approval and likely a lease modification with higher rent to account for the extra person. My roommate's face went completely red. She shouted that this wasn't fair and that she had done so much for the place. I told her that life wasn't always fair, but in this case, the law was pretty clear. I explained that if she wanted to live with her boyfriend without a roommate, she needed to find her own place together. The boyfriend finally spoke up again, suggesting that maybe they should start looking at other apartments for them to move to. She protested, saying she shouldn't have to leave her garden. I told her that her garden would survive and that plants grow in other places too. She's been even more hostile since then, but I think reality is starting to set in. Her boyfriend has been looking at apartment listings on his laptop when he comes over, and I heard them on the phone with a couple of landlords yesterday. The funniest part is that she keeps trying to guilt-trip me about ruining their relationship plans and being selfish. But I'm not the one who decided to change the living arrangement. I'm perfectly happy with the status quo. If she wants something different, she's free to pursue it, just not at my expense. I've started looking into getting the lease transferred to just my name in case they do decide to move out together. The landlord said it would be possible if I could prove I could afford the full rent on my own, which I can now that I got a promotion at work last month. Yesterday morning, I woke up to find a passive-aggressive note on my door about how some people don't appreciate others' contributions to making a house a home. I wrote a note back pointing out that paying rent on time every month for 18 months was also a pretty significant contribution to making a house a home. My ex and I had been living together in this decent apartment downtown for about 2 years. I was working as a delivery driver for a local food company, and she worked part-time at a coffee shop while going to school. Things had been rocky for months. We were arguing constantly about money, chores, and basically everything else. The final straw came when I found out she'd been going through my phone and getting mad about me texting female co-workers about work stuff. When we decided to call it quits, I knew I had to get out fast. The apartment was getting too tense, and honestly, I just needed space to think. Even though both our names were on the lease, I packed up my stuff and moved in with my buddy within a week. The breakup itself was surprisingly civil. We both knew it wasn't working anymore, and we agreed to try to stay friendly since we'd have to deal with the lease situation for a few more months. She was planning to move back in with her parents until she could find a new place, which meant getting rid of a lot of furniture and stuff we'd bought together. Since I was still technically on the lease and wanted to help wrap things up cleanly, I offered to help her sell some of the bigger items on online marketplace. I had experience moving heavy stuff from my delivery job, and she didn't have a car big enough for furniture anyway. One of the items we needed to get rid of was this massive bookshelf unit thing. It was one of those dark wood entertainment centers with shelves and cabinets. Probably weighed like 150 pounds and was awkward as hell to move. We'd bought it from some secondhand store when we first moved in together, and it had been a pain to get up to our second floor apartment back then too. I took some photos and posted it online for $60, figuring someone would want it since it was in decent shape. Within a few hours, this woman messaged me asking if it was still available. I told her yes, and she offered $50, which seemed fair enough. My ex was happy with that price when I showed her the message. But then, about an hour later, the same woman sent another message asking if I could deliver it to her place. She said she didn't have a truck and wondered what I'd charge for delivery. Her place was about 20 minutes away, and since I had my friend's pickup truck borrowed for the day anyway, I figured $20 seemed reasonable for the gas and time. She agreed right away. That's when things got weird. I was out in the parking lot loading the bookshelf into the truck bed. It took me a solid 10 minutes to get it down the stairs and wrestled into the truck without scratching it up. My ex came outside just as I was tying it down with some rope. She asked me where I was going with the bookshelf. I explained that the lady had offered me $20 to deliver it, so I was taking it over to her place now. My ex got excited and said that was awesome because she'd get some extra cash. I was confused and asked her what she meant. She told me that since the bookshelf was hers, she should get the cash for delivering it. I asked her why she would get the money when she wasn't the one delivering it. She just said that she should get it anyway. I told her flat out that either I got the delivery money or she could list the bookshelf for sale again and find someone else to deal with it. Here I was, doing her a favor by helping sell her stuff, using my friend's truck, spending my gas money, and doing all the physical work, and she thought she deserved the delivery fee on top of the $50 she was already getting for the bookshelf itself. I explained to her that she was getting $50 for the bookshelf and that was her money, but the $20 was for me driving it over there and loading it into the buyer's place. That was my work. She insisted that since it was still her bookshelf, any money from it should be hers. I asked if she was serious and told her I was doing her a favor. I said I could just leave the thing on the curb and let her figure out how to get it to the buyer herself. She panicked and said I couldn't do that because I'd already told the buyer I would deliver it. I told her to watch me and repeated that either I got the delivery fee or she could relist it and find someone else to deal with it. Like she suddenly realized she'd pushed too far and was about to lose the sale entirely. She got this panicked expression and started backtracking immediately. She quickly agreed that I could keep the $20. I thanked her sarcastically. Then she tried to justify herself by saying she just thought that since it was her bookshelf, she should get the money. I told her not to even go there. I finished tying down the bookshelf and drove off to make the delivery. The whole drive over, I kept thinking about how I'd never noticed this side of her before. Or maybe I had noticed it but made excuses for it. Like how she'd always expect me to pay when we went out, even when she had money. Or how she'd volunteer me to help her friends move without asking me first. The delivery went smoothly. The woman was really nice and even helped me carry it into her living room. She handed me the $70 total and thanked me for bringing it over. Easy money. When I got back to drop off the truck keys, my ex was still there packing boxes. She asked how the delivery went and I just said it was fine and handed her the $50. She took it without saying anything else about the delivery fee, but I could tell she was still annoyed about not getting that extra $20. The funny thing is, she tried to get me to help her move more stuff over the next few weeks, but I was suddenly too busy every time she asked. She ended up having to pay actual movers to handle the rest of her furniture, which probably cost her way more than the $20 she tried to take from me. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.